40,000 people packed into a Chicago festival ground, phones raised, waiting for something that hadn't happened in 12 years. Chief Keef stepped onto the Summer Smash stage for his first real Chicago performance since 2012. The crowd erupted. What most of them weren't thinking about in that moment was who wasn't standing up there with him. King Von, dead at 26. FBG Duck, dead at 26. Lil JoJo, killed at 18. Fredo Santana, dead at 27. Chicago drill music created an entire generation of superstars. It also buried almost all of them. This is the story of the one who got away, not through luck alone, but through one of the hardest choices a person can make, walking away from everything and everyone he had ever known. To understand how Keith Kozart became Chief Keef and how Chief Keef became one of the only original drill artists still alive, you have to understand Parkway Gardens, the South Side Chicago housing complex that the world would come to know by a different name, O Block. Keith Farrell Kozart was born on August 15, 1995 in Chicago to Lolita Carter, who was unwed and young at the time of his birth. He was named after his uncle, Keith Carter, known on the street as Big Keef, who had died before Keith was old enough to know him. Keith was raised largely by his grandmother, Margaret Carter, in the Parkway Garden homes, located in the Washington Park neighborhood on Chicago's South Side, a complex that had long served as a stronghold for the Black Disciples street gang. By the early 2010s, Chicago's South Side was absorbing a staggering volume of gun violence year after year, concentrated overwhelmingly in neighborhoods just like this one. The area around O Block specifically became so synonymous with danger that, according to local accounts, pizza delivery drivers refused to enter certain blocks, and ambulance crews reportedly waited for police escorts before responding to calls in the area. This was not a place Keith was simply observing from a safe distance. He grew up inside it, affiliated with the Black Disciples from an age before he can even remember choosing it, because in a place like O Block, you don't really choose your gang. Your block chooses it for you by virtue of where you were born and who surrounds you. O Block, 300, and Lamron were not simply neighborhoods. They were the front lines of a war between the Black Disciples and the gangster disciples that had been escalating for decades before Keith was ever born. Growing up inside that war reshaped what counted as ordinary. While other teenagers across the country were getting their first part-time jobs, kids on Keith's block were getting shot at 15 and 16 years old. Losing a friend to gun violence wasn't a tragedy that happened once in a great while. It was a recurring, almost routine feature of adolescence in that specific corner of the city. This is, in some ways, the hardest part of Keith's origin story for outsiders to fully absorb. The instinct when hearing about a homicide rate of this magnitude concentrated in a single neighborhood is to imagine it as an ongoing, visible crisis that residents are perpetually reacting to in real time, sirens and panic and constant alarm. The lived reality, according to people who grew up in similar environments during this same era, was something closer to a grim normalization. Funerals became a regular part of the social calendar. Teenagers learned which blocks to avoid, not through formal warnings, but through accumulated painful experience. The specific danger of any given day became background noise rather than something that registered as exceptional, which is itself one of the most disturbing aspects of growing up in a place like O Block during this period. Keith was not unusually unlucky in this environment. He was, in a sense, exactly as exposed to violence as virtually everyone else around him, which says something significant about how widespread and entrenched that violence actually was. What set Keith apart from many of his peers even as a teenager, surrounded by that same violence, was a genuine creative gift. While some of his friends were planning robberies or running other street operations, Keef was in his grandmother's living room, recording music on a basic laptop and microphone setup, trying to document in his own raw way exactly what he was seeing outside his window. Some of his earliest recordings reportedly captured the sound of gunfire and sirens in the background, an unintentional but unmistakable signature of the environment that produced them. By late 2011, Keef had just turned 16, and his name was already spreading well beyond O Block. The broader South Side had started paying attention to a kid who had somehow figured out how to turn raw trauma into something that sounded, against all odds, like victory. He called the sound he was developing drill music. At the time, almost nobody understood that this single word was about to reshape the sound of mainstream hip-hop within just a few years. In December 2011, the timeline of Keef's life split into two distinct tracks that would run in parallel for years to come. Keef was arrested after allegedly pointing a gun at police officers, an incident in which officers fired at him and missed. He was placed on house arrest, fitted with an ankle monitor, and confined to his grandmother's apartment while facing serious charges. For most teenagers, that kind of confinement would have simply been a punishment to endure. For Keef, it became something else entirely, a recording studio and the beginning of an entirely new identity. When you can't physically go to a recording studio, the only option left is bringing the studio to you. Inside his grandmother's living room, Keef set up an almost absurdly minimal recording rig, a USB microphone, an aging laptop, and a young producer named Young Chop sending him beats over email from a distance. That modest setup, assembled inside a teenager's house arrest confinement, would go on to influence the sound of an entire genre. In January 2012, Keef released Bang, uploading it directly to YouTube without any label involvement, accompanied by a video showing him and his friends inside his grandmother's apartment, visibly armed, a particularly risky decision given that Keef himself was actively on house arrest at the time. But that unfiltered authenticity, dangerous as it was, became the exact currency that made the music resonate. Then, in March 2012, came I Don't Like. Young Chop's beat was minimalist and aggressive, almost hypnotic in its repetition, and Keef's vocal delivery sounded less like conventional rapping and more like a direct testimony from inside the world he was describing. Every line functioned as a kind of declaration, every verse a roll call of specific rivals and grievances. The song spread far beyond Chicago almost immediately, racking up millions of views within weeks and reaching listeners in places as far removed from O Block's reality as suburban Minnesota. But here's where the song's success became genuinely complicated. Keef was not speaking in abstraction or metaphor. When he referenced specific gang terminology or named people in his lyrics, those were real affiliations and real individuals, some of whom had genuine motive to want him dead. Chicago police and prosecutors reportedly began cross-referencing his lyrics against actual crime reports, treating his music less as creative expression and more as a potential roadmap to real-world events. The same authenticity that built Keef's audience was simultaneously building a public record that law enforcement found impossible to ignore. In May 2012, Kanye West, already one of the biggest artists in the world, remixed I Don't Like, bringing in Pusha T, Jadakiss, and Big Sean. The remix charted on Billboard, and shortly afterward, Interscope Records signed Keef to a contract reportedly worth several $1 million. Keef was 17 years old, still confined to his grandmother's apartment under the terms of his house arrest, suddenly sitting on more money than almost anyone from his neighborhood had ever legally accumulated. The question that immediately followed, one that would define the next several years of his life, was whether that kind of money could actually buy a way out of a conflict that had nothing to do with finances in the first place. To understand what happened next, it helps to understand the specific structure of Chicago's gang landscape. This isn't a city-wide rivalry between two massive organizations. It is block-by-block warfare with decades of specific, localized history behind it. The Black Disciples and Gangster Disciples, commonly abbreviated as BD and GD, had been in conflict for generations, but by 2012, that conflict had taken on an entirely new dimension. It had gone digital. Disputes that once played out exclusively in person now escalated over Twitter in the morning and could result in actual shootings by the afternoon, with Instagram posts functioning, in effect, as informal hit lists. Chief Keef represented the Black Disciples, specifically the O Block and 300 set, and his music functioned as something beyond entertainment within that context. Every song amounted to a claim of territory and dominance, broadcast to an audience far larger than the neighborhood it originated from. Joseph Coleman, known professionally as Lil JoJo, was an 18-year-old rapper from Chicago's Inglewood neighborhood, affiliated with the Gangster Disciples, specifically a faction known as Brick Squad, or 069. Where Keef had a major label contract and national attention, JoJo had a fraction of that platform and a considerable amount of hunger to be heard. Watching Chief Keef's rapid rise, JoJo apparently saw an opening. If Keef could build a national career partly on the back of anti-GD lyrics, there was no reason JoJo couldn't build his own reputation the same way, in reverse. In the months leading up to September 2012, JoJo released a diss track titled BDK, widely understood as shorthand for Black Disciple Killer, directly responding to and reworking Chief Keef's own song, 300. The accompanying video showed JoJo and his associates throwing up Gangster Disciple signs and issuing direct challenges to the Black Disciples and to Keef's camp specifically. According to people close to the situation, the underlying spark for JoJo's track traced back even further to a line in a Lil Durk song that had needled the Gangster Disciples months earlier. Whatever the precise origin, the response on social media to JoJo's track was immediate and explosive. Real names and addresses began circulating in comment threads. What had started as a musical back and forth had visibly tipped into something with real physical stakes. The events of September 4th, 2012 are worth examining in detail because that single day reshaped not just Chief Keef's life, but the broader national conversation around drill music as a genre. According to multiple accounts pieced together afterward, JoJo and his associates traveled by car that day into the area around Parkway Gardens, O Block itself, recording themselves taunting members of Chief Keef's circle, including a tense exchange with Lil Reese, who was outside near his own home at the time. The footage captured Reese responding directly, telling JoJo he intended to kill him. Later that evening, around 6:13 p.m., JoJo posted his specific location on Twitter, the 6900 block of South Princeton Avenue, announcing essentially that he was out in the open and unafraid. A short while later, while JoJo was in the area on a bicycle, a vehicle described by witnesses as tan or gray in color pulled up and a gunman opened fire. JoJo attempted to flee but was struck. He was pronounced dead shortly afterward. He was 18 years old. The events that led up to that moment had unfolded with a speed that in hindsight feels almost vertiginous. Within the span of a single afternoon, JoJo had gone from posting taunting footage online to broadcasting his exact location, seemingly under the impression that doing so was an act of fearlessness rather than an enormous risk. People who study the social dynamics of online amplified gang conflict have pointed to incidents like this one as early, formative examples of a pattern that would recur again and again throughout the following decade. Young men having built a public persona around invulnerability, making decisions in the heat of that persona that directly contradicted basic personal safety, often with an audience watching in close to real time. JoJo's brother would later say that the entire sequence of events, from the diss track to the final bike ride, had felt to those closest to him like a slow-motion countdown that nobody managed to interrupt in time. Less than 2 hours after the shooting, Chief Keef posted a tweet that would follow him for the rest of his career. Ha 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 ha, it's sad cause that JoJo wanted to be just like us, LMAO. That single tweet transformed Keith in the eyes of much of the public and of Chicago law enforcement from rising star to person of interest. Chicago police announced they were investigating a possible connection between Keith and the murder, though notably not as a suspected shooter, given his documented house arrest status, but for a possible role in encouraging or directing the violence from a distance. National media outlets picked up the story almost immediately, running headlines about a teenage rapper appearing to mock a rival's murder in real time, introducing millions of people who had never heard of drill music to Chief Keef's name under the worst possible circumstances. Keith quickly claimed his Twitter account had been hacked and that the tweet wasn't his. Many people, including JoJo's own mother, did not believe him. She has publicly and repeatedly maintained her suspicion that Keith's circle was connected to her son's death. Chief Keef, for his part, has consistently and firmly denied any involvement in JoJo's murder, expressing what he has described as genuine remorse toward JoJo's family, despite denying responsibility. It bears stating clearly, to this day, no arrests have ever been made in connection with JoJo's murder, and the case remains officially unsolved. Chicago police did, at one point, investigate Keith Bonds, a Black Disciples member, as a possible suspect. Bonds himself was shot and killed less than 2 weeks after JoJo's murder, in what some believed was retaliation for it, though that too was never definitively resolved. What is not in dispute is the impact of that single tweet, regardless of who actually controlled the account in that moment. Within weeks, Keith was effectively banned from performing in Chicago. His shows were shut down. At 17 years old, he found himself simultaneously the most talked about new artist in the country and functionally exiled from the city that had produced him. In the years that followed JoJo's death, violence continued to circle Keith's life with a frequency that bordered on the unbelievable. In January 2013, his stepbrother was shot and killed in Chicago. Still bound by the terms of his probation, Keith could not get permission to attend the funeral in person and reportedly watched portions of the service remotely. In March 2014, shots were fired at the home of Keith's manager in Northfield, a quiet, affluent Chicago suburb, a location that was supposed to represent a meaningful step away from the dangers of his old neighborhood. No one was struck, but the message was unmistakable. Distance and money had not actually placed him outside the reach of the conflict that had shaped his early life. The following month, April 2014, brought a loss that affected Keith on an entirely different level. His cousin, Mario Blood Money Hess, was shot and killed in Englewood in broad daylight. Blood Money wasn't only family, he was also a signed artist on Keith's own label, someone they had been actively building a career together with. Keith flew back to Chicago for the funeral, and what he encountered there left a lasting impression. The funeral home itself was reportedly surrounded by police, anticipating potential retaliation with members of both sides of the ongoing conflict in attendance. It was less a memorial than a tense standoff. Keef has since described that moment as a turning point, telling interviewers that Blood Money's death taught him that he genuinely could not continue living in Chicago, not out of fear exactly, but out of a clear-eyed recognition of where that path was leading. In July 2015, violence touched his circle again. An associate known as Capo, Marvin Carr, was shot and killed, and in a particularly horrifying detail, the getaway vehicle fleeing that shooting struck a stroller, killing a 13-month-old child who had no possible connection to any of the underlying disputes. Across these years, the pattern was unmistakable and exhausting. A stepbrother, a manager's house, a cousin and collaborator, an associate, and repeatedly entirely innocent bystanders caught in crossfire that had nothing to do with them. Keef was no longer simply someone who might become a victim of this violence himself. His presence and visibility appeared to function as a kind of magnet, pulling danger toward everyone in his immediate orbit. While violence pursued Keef from one direction, the legal system was closing in from another, and in a strange, almost paradoxical way, that legal pressure may have ultimately helped keep him alive. The arrests piled up steadily. In May 2013, he was caught driving 110 miles per hour in a BMW while holding only a learner's permit. The judge in that case reportedly told him directly that he seemed to believe he was invincible and was certainly not. In October 2013, he was arrested for marijuana possession in public, a relatively minor charge on its own, but a serious violation given his active probation status. The court ordered him into rehab, where he subsequently tested positive again, triggering yet another violation. The most consequential incident came in January 2014, when Pitchfork published a video interview filmed at a gun range showing Keef holding a rifle and appearing intoxicated while discussing his rivals. The video, by its very existence, constituted direct documentary evidence of him violating the terms of his probation. The presiding judge ultimately sentenced him to 60 days in juvenile detention. That detention, while clearly framed as punishment, removed Keef from the outside world during a period when several more of his friends were killed. Funerals he was physically unable to attend because he was incarcerated. According to people close to him, he told his grandmother during a visit that, locked up as he was at least still alive, a strange but genuine moment of gratitude for confinement that, under any other circumstance, would have been purely a hardship. One of the more remarkable aspects of Chief Keef's generation of drill artists is how thoroughly they documented their own lives, and in many cases, their own legal liabilities, in real time without any prompting from law enforcement. Every tweet functioned as a kind of public record. Every Instagram post offered investigators a time-stamped, geo-tagged piece of potential evidence. Prosecutors increasingly did not need traditional informants when the artists themselves were posting photos of cash next to firearms, tagging their locations at parties that later became crime scenes, and commenting directly on the social media accounts of people who would later become victims. The Pitchfork gun range video stands as a clear example. It wasn't the product of an undercover investigation or a hidden camera. Keef had invited the outlet in and effectively filmed his own probation violation in high definition. When prosecutors eventually played that footage in court, there was very little a defense attorney could do to argue around it. Keef was far from alone in this pattern. Across the broader Chicago drill scene, artists were documenting threats, locations, and grievances publicly and constantly. Lil JoJo had tweeted his own location shortly before his death. Other artists in the scene would, in the years that followed, post lyrics referencing specific violent acts or publicize their daily routines and movements with a level of detail that made them easy to locate. Law enforcement agencies eventually developed specific units focused on what amounted to monitoring public social media activity for evidence, since so much of it was being voluntarily posted in plain sight. The deep irony at the center of all this is that the same digital visibility that built Chief Keef's career, the YouTube views, the Twitter following that helped bring him to Kanye's attention, the Instagram presence that helped justify his initial record deal, was simultaneously assembling a body of evidence that could have produced a far more severe legal outcome, or worse, gotten him killed before any court date arrived. By 2014, his own legal counsel reportedly gave him blunt advice: stop posting entirely, because the ongoing stream of content was functionally building a case against him for free. But stopping wasn't a simple option. The persona, the music, the entire public-facing identity of Chief Keef ran on the same content. Without it, in a very real sense, Chief Keef as a public figure ceased to exist. This created a genuinely unusual bind, one that few public figures in any other industry have ever had to navigate quite so literally. Most artists who build a career on authenticity face reputational risks if that authenticity later proves to be exaggerated or manufactured. Keef faced the opposite problem entirely. His authenticity was not in question, and that was precisely the danger. Every piece of content that made his music feel real and urgent to listeners was simultaneously potential courtroom evidence and potential targeting information for actual rivals. There was no version of continuing to build the Chief Keef brand that didn't also continue feeding both the legal system and the streets information about where he was, who he was with, and what grievances remained unresolved. The decision to eventually step back from that constant stream of self-documentation wasn't simply a matter of growing up or maturing as an artist. It was closer to a survival calculation, weighing the commercial cost of going quiet against the mounting legal and physical risk of staying loud. The solution Keef eventually settled on was a difficult and somewhat untested one: leave Chicago physically while attempting to preserve the Chief Keef persona and continue making drill music from a distance. In theory, it sounded straightforward. In practice, it meant fundamentally restructuring his entire life. In June 2014, Keef landed at LAX, 18 years old, a millionaire on paper while feeling, by his own account, deeply unmoored. He rented a large home in the San Fernando Valley, complete with a pool and tennis court, the kind of physical comfort that, on its surface, represented enormous success. But what he has said he valued most about Los Angeles wasn't the weather or the industry access. It was the quiet, the simple absence of sirens, and the constant low-level anticipation of violence that had defined every day of his life up to that point. Exile, even when it is the thing that saves your life, remains exile. Chicago's legal system did not simply let him go. Outstanding warrants continued to follow him for years. When Keef attempted to perform via hologram at a Chicago festival in 2015, then Mayor Rahm Emanuel personally intervened, describing him publicly as an unacceptable role model who promoted violence, and the performance was shut down within minutes, a striking demonstration of just how much influence officials believed Keef still held over the city, even from thousands of miles away, and even as a projected image rather than a physical presence. From his home in California, Keef watched, largely through social media, as people from his old world continued to die. In January 2018, Fredo Santana, his cousin and fellow artist, died at 27. Keef posted a tribute but could not attend the funeral due to his outstanding legal situation. In August 2020, FBG Duck was shot and killed in Chicago's Gold Coast shopping district, dead at 26. In November 2020, King Von, a rapper many believed might follow a similar path out of Chicago the way Keef had, was shot and killed outside a nightclub in Atlanta following an argument that escalated within roughly 30 seconds at age 26. Each death functioned as a kind of grim confirmation of exactly the trajectory Keef had chosen to step away from. Keef's music changed considerably during his years in Los Angeles. He experimented with auto-tune, melodic ballads, and other sounds quite different from the raw, aggressive style that had originally made him famous. Some of his most devoted early fans saw this evolution as a kind of dilution, a loss of the specific energy that had defined Chief Keef in the first place, an energy that, by his own account, was deeply tied to proximity to real danger rather than something he could fully access from a place of physical safety. His own children grew up largely removed from the Chicago that had shaped their father, with his oldest daughter, born when Keef himself was just 16, reportedly believing for much of her early childhood that her father was simply from Los Angeles. The version of Keef that existed publicly, Chief Keef, increasingly diverged from Keith Cozart, the private individual living a much quieter life away from the spotlight's original source material. By 2024, 12 years had passed since he left, longer than the entire span of time he had actually lived in Chicago as the artist the world knew as Chief Keef. Old Block itself had, in a strange twist, become something of a global tourist curiosity, with visitors reportedly taking photos at locations where some of his friends had died. Keef himself, despite his fame and wealth, still could not safely return to visit his grandmother's old apartment without risking arrest or worse. Which brings the story back to June 16, 2024, Summer Smash in Chicago, 12 years of effective exile ending on a single festival stage. By that point, the outstanding legal issues had finally been resolved, and while the underlying tensions from years of gang conflict had not been formally resolved in any official sense, much of the immediate danger had diminished, simply because so many of the people involved in the original conflicts were now either dead or incarcerated. Chief Keef could, for the first time in over a decade, actually come home. He brought his 13-year-old daughter on stage with him that night, a child who had never seen her father perform in the city he came from. The crowd's reaction when he launched into Faneto, a song he had never previously performed live in Chicago, was overwhelming. But watching the footage closely, his eyes can be seen continuously scanning the crowd throughout the performance, the kind of habitual vigilance that doesn't simply disappear after 12 years, even with significant security in place, even with most of his original rivals no longer a threat. Some habits, formed early enough and reinforced by enough loss, don't fully go away. The set list that night amounted to something like a roll call of the dead. Love Sosa connected to memories of Fredo Santana. I Don't Like connected directly back to the conflict that preceded JoJo's death. Earned It, featuring King Von from years before his own death, added another name to the list. 40,000 people, many of whom had been in elementary school when Keef originally left Chicago, knew every word, having absorbed the mythology of Chief Keef as cultural inheritance rather than lived memory. By most available estimates, more than 30 prominent figures connected to Chicago's drill music scene have died from gun violence in the years since the genre's emergence in the early 2010s. That is an extraordinary, almost unbelievable death toll for a single regional music scene over roughly a decade and a half. Chief Keef is, by a wide margin, the most prominent original figure from that first generation still alive, and the evidence suggests this isn't because he was tougher, smarter, or more skilled than the people who didn't make it. It's because at a specific moment, he made the decision to physically remove himself from the environment that was producing all of those deaths, even at the cost of the very authenticity and proximity to danger that had originally made his music compelling. There is a version of this story that frames pride and overconfidence as the typical engine of downfall in stories like this one. Chief Keef's story inverts that pattern in an important way. It was specifically his success, his fame, and the legal and physical pressure that came with both that ultimately forced him into the kind of exile that most people in his position never seriously consider, let alone follow through on. He lost a great deal in that exile: his original sound, a certain kind of credibility within the world that produced him, and years of direct connection to the city and the people who shaped him. What he kept, by virtually any reasonable measure, was his life. After Summer Smash, Keef returned to Los Angeles, back to the relative quiet that he has repeatedly described as what he values most about the life he built for himself after leaving. Chicago receded again into memory, occasional headlines and Instagram posts from a distance. But for one night, in front of 40,000 people who had grown up idolizing a version of him frozen in 2012, he was home, the last surviving witness to a conflict that had claimed nearly everyone else who started alongside him. Sometimes the bravest available choice isn't staying to prove something. Sometimes it's recognizing, early enough to actually act on it, that survival and legend cannot always coexist in the same life, and choosing deliberately to keep the life. It would be a mistake to read Chief Keef's story as a simple, uplifting one, a tidy lesson about the wisdom of walking away from danger. He did not escape unscathed. He lost direct access to the city that raised him for over a decade. He watched from a distance and largely through a phone screen as people he had grown up with, collaborated with, and in some cases mentored, were killed one after another, with no ability to intervene and often no ability to even attend their funerals. The version of Chief Keef that exists today, older, based in Los Angeles, raising children who barely know the Chicago that shaped their father, is fundamentally a different person from the teenager who recorded "I Don't Like" between gunshots in his grandmother's living room. That transformation came at a real cost, even if it was, by every meaningful measure, the right trade to make. What his story ultimately offers isn't a clean moral, but a genuinely difficult question that drill music as a genre has never fully resolved. Whether the same conditions that make this kind of music feel urgent and real to its audience are also, almost by necessity, the conditions that make survival within it so vanishingly rare. Chief Keef found one way through. 30 or more of his peers did not. The difference between those two outcomes may have less to do with talent, toughness, or luck than with the simple, brutal fact that one of them found a way to leave before the world caught up to him, and the rest never did.